This book is kind of a personal passion of mine because I think that after talking about who gets in and why for the last couple of years, and in many ways they're companion books, I really want to give parents permission to think more broadly about what makes a good college, because we know there are more than 25 good colleges out there. The quality of higher education is not reserved just for the top 25 in any rankings. So I want to give them permission to think more broadly about what makes a good college and then the tools to figure out what is the dream college for their kid or their kid's dream college. That's what this is really about, because I know after being in and around higher ed for more than 25 years, that something is wrong right now, that we are too focused on elite higher education, and that there's great opportunities at many, many more places. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
hoping to do with this book. One of the things that we don't look at when we go to a campus is what is the curriculum that you're actually going to be taking as in any major. So on many campuses, you're actually going to be in a core curriculum in many cases. Sometimes that might be your entire first year of college. Who teaches those courses? Is it full-time faculty? Is it part-time faculty? Are they graduate students? How big are those courses? Are they all 300 person courses or more where you're going to be sitting in the back and not really getting to know the professor? Does the professor come to class early? Do they stay late? That's one of the things I notice when I'm on campuses. It's very hard, by the way, as a prospective student to actually go see a class. It's something that I always encourage people to ask for if they're going to visit a campus. I did that, by the way, a couple of years ago on Instagram, Lisa, and I literally had a VP for enrollment say, "Don't recommend that." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, because we're going to be inundated with those requests and we don't like that." Well, you're the consumer. So you should be asking these questions. I really want to know is how much interaction are faculty having with first year students? Are they, what is, to the very least, you can walk down the hallway where professors have offices, see where their office hours are, see if they're in there. Maybe even as a prospective student, knock if they're not busy and see what's up. Because the thing that we know from all the research, especially now in these first couple of weeks of the fall semester. I see this in your groups. I see this in a lot of parent groups right now of parents saying, "My kid just called from college. It's week one. They hate it. They want to transfer. They want to come home, right? They've only been there for a couple of days. What should we do?" Well, you can find this sense of belonging, during the college search. And a lot of this is those connections with professors. Professors aren't going to be the only mentors. They're not going to be the only people that care about you. But in those first couple of weeks of college, beyond your peers, beyond who you're going to meet in your residence hall, and maybe in clubs, they are going to be your immediate connection to college. And so I want to know who they are. And I think that's the question that you should be asking on the college tour. Ask the students in your major. Ask the tour guide about their favorite professors. See if they could talk about those professors that changed their lives, because I know that many of us could talk about that, about our own college experience. That's the question you should be asking around faculty in particular.
Are there places we can look for any data or information around that parents and students should be studying?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot. And that's the problem. So one of the things you can look for are average class sizes, not the entire, so most colleges will tout their student faculty ratio, and it's always going to be like, 8 to 1 or 10 to 1 or 12 to 1. Don't pay any attention to that because that's college wide. It really differs by major, by school within a college. So you're a university. So you want to ask, what is the ratio for this school or my major? How many courses am I going to have my freshman year with more than 20 or 30 students? Small classes, big classes. I don't get too caught up in classes because a lot of it is about the professor. So you always want to ask the tour guide or other people that you meet, other students, to talk about, who their professors were. What did they like about them? What did they dislike about them? But that class size is important, because if you get a small class at some point during your first year, you can't hide in those places. It's impossible to hide in those places, and it's much easier to hide in a 300 course a 300 student course. And so asking that question about the data is critically important. One other thing about a little bit about teaching, but more about your major. You also want to ask, how many students graduate in my major every year? And the reason why, Lisa, I want to recommend that, because it also gives you a sense of the size of the department that you're going to be majoring in. And so if they have 20 students a year, times four, for your, 4 years of college, you get a sense of the size of the department. And why is that important? Because most students, I just had an item in my newsletter a couple of weeks ago about this. Essentially, 80% of students major in like 10% of the majors on campus. So 90% of the majors are essentially under enrolled. And why that's important now is we just saw this happen in Indiana. We're seeing this in a bunch of states at public universities where they're saying you have to cut under enrolled majors. So you may end up at a place where if it's not a big enough major, they're going to kind of cheat on the faculty. So you might get stuck with a lot of part-timers, a lot of adjuncts. Nothing bad about adjuncts because there could be some very good industry-based adjuncts. You could get a lot of graduate students, and that may be a major that may not last. So you really want to go to a place where the major has a sizable number of students to make it a going concern.
Let's touch on something for a moment that you discuss a lot in the book, and that is how important it is to find a school where you're going to get connected to those important internships, which become ever more important, and later jobs. How do students and parents assess how good a college is at helping them in that process?
Well, one of the things you want to look at two options here. One is around internships, co-ops. I'm going to kind of group them all together.
Yep.
Internships, co-ops, long project-based learning. First, you want to see, is it part of the curriculum in my major? If they add it into the requirements, that means it matters to the institution. Now, just because it's in the curriculum and it's a requirement, I met somebody recently whose daughter is at Clemson in the business school. They have a requirement in their major for an internship, and he was telling me that this father was telling me that they didn't get any help in actually getting the internship. So the second question you want to ask is, how much help does the department, do faculty and others help you in getting those internships? So the first thing you're looking for are requirements. If it's a requirement, it matters more to the institution. But even if it's a requirement, how much help are they going to give you? If you have neither, if it's not as part of the curriculum, you're going to be kind of probably on your own. So then you want to ask at the Career Center, you want to ask in your department, where have students interned the last couple of years? When do they intern? That's another key question, Lisa, because as I point out in the book, a lot of this now is additive. In other words, you probably are not going to be able to get an internship between your first year and second year. You might be able to get one between your second and third, but that one between your third and fourth, absolutely critical because 80% of full-time hires now at Fortune 500 companies come from those internships, particularly between that summer, between junior and senior year. Sometimes it obviously happens during the year as well. And so those internships lead to jobs. But to get those internships junior to senior year, often you have to kind of get into the runway into them, and that starts earlier in college.
Thanks. I should have mentioned something earlier. My apologies, everyone. You will be sent the recording tomorrow. I can see people are asking that question. Jeff, you mentioned something earlier on about belonging and getting a sense of belonging in a college. Students often go, they do a visit for an hour or two, and that's really their exposure to university. How do they know whether they're going to have a sense of belonging, and how do they know whether that's important to the college that they cultivate that sense of belonging with their students?
So, how do you know it's important to the college? One of the things I'm looking for often are first year experiences. We often talk in admissions around orientation, right? Most of us who went to college, 30 years ago probably went through a orientation program for a couple of days before school started, and that was kind of it. Now, the thing really at most colleges, many of the the schools that I list in the Dream School book have very structured first year programs. Now, these all look a little different, but what they're trying to do is put students in kind of a cohort based experience. so that you get to know other students who may have similar interests. Uh, that also puts you in front of a similar faculty member, the same faculty member, every week. Furman has an experience like this, as does St. Olaf, which are, by the way, two of the dream schools of the 75 listed in the book. These are very structured programs. And what it does is it puts you in a small group of students that have similar interests. It puts you in front of a full-time faculty member who may not be your advisor and is most likely not your advisor. So you get to know another faculty member. And it's very structured, meaning it, where orientation often just throws a lot of information at you, it helps you kind of move into that first year of college in a much slower way and really understand what you need to do. You know, what are the clubs and activities you want to join? What are the internships you want to do? How do you really understand what a major is and what you want to major in if you haven't declared one yet? There's all these things that happen over a longer period of time as part of these first year experiences. And most of these are labeled in that way. There's even a big conference in higher ed called FYE, first year experiences. And now, by the way, many colleges are adding a second year, a sophomore year experience to structure these a little bit. And I talk about this in the book, Lisa, as a kind of scaffolding around the beginning of college. And I know that many parents out there will be like, well, I just kind of want to let my kids sink or swim. If you remember back in the day when we all went to college, the professor would say, you know, look to your right, look to your left. You know, one of you won't be around here in the spring. That's not really the kind of going mindset anymore in colleges and universities. They really are there to try to help support you in that transition, especially from high school to college. So you want to look for programs that have, you want to look for schools that have these programs that structure particularly that first year, maybe even that second year, and then slowly they take that away, moving into your junior and senior year as you move into the workforce. And by the way, that's a sign of a good college, not a college that wants to hold your hand. That's a college that wants to help you succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, You've mentioned a couple of times the list at the back of the book. I just want to remind everybody, we're talking about Dream School. It's out September 9th. This list, which is not a list like you find in a magazine, the explanation is 50 pages long. I
I'm
look,
sorry about
it's
that.
okay. No, you don't just label these schools and name them. You explain why these are colleges that give kids such a great experience and have admissions rates that are more manageable than some of
And
the,
that is, you know, Lisa, that is the key.
yeah.
Admissions rates that are manageable. I mean, we have all the rankings out there. I know this is ranking season, so every week, you know, LinkedIn had theirs, and Forbes will be coming out with theirs. The granddaddy of them all, U.S. News will be coming out in a couple of weeks. You know, and once in a while, you'll see surprises on them. Babson was in the top 10, I know, for LinkedIn's rankings that came out a couple of weeks ago. But if you look at the top 10 of most of these, they're all the same schools. You know, I could tell you exactly what's going to be in the top 10 of most of these. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Chicago, you know, go down the name. And you want to know what they all have in common? They all have acceptance rates that are single digits. So, I mean, it's great. These are great schools. I'm not saying they're not great schools, but if you say, well, these are the best schools, here are the top 10, top 15, you can't get into any of them. So how is that list that helpful? So what we did with our list is the first filter that we used was selectivity. So we did not include any schools on our list that accept fewer than 20% of students. Most of them accept more than, you know, these are obviously numbers that change from year to year. Most of them accept 25% or more. Most of them accept 50, 60% or more in some cases. You know, and then we looked at we also mixed up the list to make sure that there was, or balance the list to make sure that there were 60% of them are public colleges and universities, because 60% of American students go to public colleges and universities. So we wanted to make sure they were well represented. And then we did a balanced by geography. Because here's the other thing. Probably many people on this call think, well, my kids will go away to college, but the average student in the US goes to college within 50, on average, 50 miles of home. So we think of this idea of going away to college. Yeah, and a lot of kids do. They go many states away. Many kids go to college in their own state. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a list that was representative geographically of the US as well.
Deanna's going to asking a quick question, and I want to jump on it now because it Did you take affordability into account when you created this list
We did.
in the
So,
back of the book?
let me run through the how we put the list together very quickly. I'm not going to go through all 50 pages, as you said. So the first thing we did was look at selectivity. So how to be, 20% or above. Most of them again are 25% or above. Then we looked at schools that were above 1,000 students. Why that threshold? 40% of the US market is under 1,000 students. We have a lot of tiny colleges out there. I think many of them are not going to survive. They're going to have to merge. Some of them will go out of business. Some of them will be acquired. We've been seeing that already. I didn't want to put schools that were financially vulnerable on the list. So they have at least 1,000 students. We did look at affordability, and here's how we did it. We looked at what we put together was something called a price to earnings ratio. How much are you going to pay? And it's net price, by the way. So that includes merit aid. On average, what's the net price that you're going to pay for this college? And then what's the outcome? What's the earnings outcome? Because you could go to a very expensive college, have to pay full price, and the outcome might be great. But by the way, you could go down a school down the street. The outcome could be pretty similar, and you will pay half the price. So why not take that into consideration? So the price to earnings ratio. We also looked at schools that kind of punched above their weight in terms of those outcomes, graduation rates and earnings. And what does that mean? Punch above their weight. We were able to look at the students they're bringing in the door. It's really easy to be Harvard and bring in the best and brightest and turn out those students to work at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and Facebook or Meta. But what if you take students who come from a variety of different academic and socioeconomic backgrounds and you turn them into these great students who go into great jobs? You're punching above your weight, and we took that into account as well. And then finally, we worked with Burning Glass, and which looks at where students go to get jobs after college. And we wanted to look at places at colleges that had a variety of outcomes. Meaning, if you look at a lot of these lists, I mentioned Babson earlier, great school. But the reason why Babson's outcomes are so great, it's a business school. Most of the students are going to work, in banks and other big businesses. A lot of schools, MIT does well. Why does MIT do well? A lot of STEM graduates. So it's easier for schools that have a lot of STEM and business majors to do better in these outcomes-based rankings because most of their students are going into high-paying careers. So we wanted to look at schools that had a variety of outcomes in terms of their students.
For whatever different courses the kids might have studied.
Exactly, right. Because I was a there's nothing wrong with being a humanities major.
Um,